I grew up in the segregated South in the year 1950, and as a child, my parents never talked to me about race or racism. They were Christians, so they never talked to me about any of the tribulations they went through, any of the situations of prejudice that they went through, whatever. They never talked to me. It wasn't until after I got out of the military in 1974, came home, that my father began to talk to me about different things that he went through as a young man, even when he was in the military. He shared with me then. But as a teenager, back, my parents never told me about anything regarding the trials and tribulations that they went through because of their race. So as a child, I grew up not understanding. I had no comprehension of racism at all. Grew up in a black neighborhood, had no interaction with whites. It wasn't until I went into the military in 1970, because of the draft, the Vietnam War was going on, that I began to interact with people of other races. Well, in the military, I began to read a lot of books on race. Actually, I began to read a lot of black books, black history books. I read books like Before the Mayflower by Leroy Bennett Jr., Sold on Ice by Edward Cleaver, The N-Word by Dick Gregory. 100 years. I read a book called 100 Years of Lynching that really got me really angry at white people. I read the book Black Like Me. I think it was by the man named I think it's Howard Griffin, a white man that turned his skin black and went to the South to see what it was like living as a black man. Another book called Soul Sister, a white woman who did the same thing. Then I even branched over to books like Bury My Heart and Wounded Knee, regarding the plight of the American Indian. And by reading these books, I began to read those books and others, I began to get very angry at whites because of what happened in the past. I really did. At that time, especially back in '71, the song Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud by James Brown was still going strong. The Black Panther movement was going strong. A lot of changes were occurring. Blacks were marching for their rights, and a lot of things were happening. So, but reading these books, I began to be very angry at whites. I wasn't angry at God, but I was angry at white people because reading about all these things that occurred, slavery and the lynchings and all that stuff. And I remember as I was walking out of my barracks to the chow hall to eat, a voice spoke to me and said, "Why don't you study race?" Now, I thought this was my conscience talking to me. Actually, it was the Lord, but I didn't know. This voice, as clear as a bell, said, "Why don't you study race?" And I spoke out loud to the voice and said, "I will. And if I find out that there is such a thing as a black race or a white race, I will never associate with white people again." And so when I walked out of the chow hall, walked out of the barracks, went to the chow hall to eat. And when I finished eating, I went to the base library and I began to read every book at the base library that had anything to do with race. And I read every book in the library. Every book, every magazine associated with race. Now let me just share this before I go on. Is that this is my book right here. This book is years of study on race. from 1971 until many years later. On the back it says anthropology, race, racism, and a very controversial word called miscegenation. It's a word that white people use, and it was regarding interracial dating, interracial marriage, interracial sex, whatever. Transracial adoption, you name it. I studied race from every angle. I did. And let me just say this. There is no such thing as a pure race. There isn't, people. No such thing as a pure race. And let me just also talk about this before I forget. You have two people that look white. They married. People, you would be shocked how many couples that when you look at them, they look white. That woman have a black child or a dark-skinned child. And the first thing jumps into that husband's mind is that she cheated on me. She had sex with a black man. Not really. He had some ancestors that were black or dark-skinned. People, it happens all the time. I mean, I'm around black people who have babies. The wife is kind of light-skinned, not that light, and the husband is maybe too, but they black. I look at that baby look like a white child. I'm serious. Now, as the child get older, they get darker. I've seen a lot of black children in black kids that look white. So in all honesty, a lot of these hospitals, I mean, especially back in the 60s and maybe even the 70s, a lot of these whites women had dark-skinned children, they just put them up for adoption. The husband get angry at the wife because he accused her of cheating without realizing of that black ancestor that's probably in his background or in her black background. Not only that, there is no such thing as a pure race anyway. Years of studying race, people, have proven that. Let me go back to the base. It had to be within 3 weeks of studying that I realized that race as we know it is really not true. Actually, the concept black, white, red, and yellow race is really not accurate. This shirt I got on is black. All you got to do is look at a white sheet of paper. It's white. But these concepts is set in stone in our brains. And the biggest problem is that when we put the wrong characteristic with these labels. Black people are lazy and they love watermelon. Chinese love rice and they like doing laundry. You know what I'm talking about. The Indians are savages and they like to scalp people. And we could just go on and on. Now, I studied race from the natural standpoint. I mean, I studied anthropology. I studied race from every angle possible. Interracial dating, interracial sex relationship, transracial adoption, blacks who turned white, this disease called vitiligo, whites who had dark-skinned children in Africa, and African couple, the wife had a dark child, and it just all, transracial adoption, whatever. Anything with a racial angle, I studied it, people. I studied a little bit of genetics. That's really deep. I couldn't handle that. But the scripture says in Acts 17, I think 26 says, God is made of one blood, all nations of the earth. Everybody's blood is red. It wasn't until a few years later that I began to study race from a biblical perspective. We all came from Adam and Eve. And when God divided mankind and scattered them all over the world, he did not divide them by skin color. Remember, Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the nations of the world came from them. I think it's in Genesis 10th chapter, I think. 9th or 10th chapter. And when God scattered the nations all over the world, he scattered them by language. He said, let us go down and scatter them and confuse their language. And they could not comprehend or understand one another. And God, the Bible says that God scattered them over the face of the earth. They were scattered by language, not by skin color. The concept of racism, as far as slavery is concerned, was contrived by the slave masters to keep darker-skinned people into perpetual slavery. Actually, the first slaves in America was white, Caucasian. They really was. But they could escape and blend into society very easily. But dark-skinned Africans could not. That's right, the first slaves were really white, Caucasian, not black. Mankind have been enslaving mankind for centuries. And also, I found out something very interesting also, is that, yes, there were black racists. That's right, black racists, as well as black prejudice. There's a difference between a person being prejudiced and a person being a racist. A person that's prejudiced just don't have sufficient knowledge. But a racist hates the person of another race. That's the difference. And I can go into some more detail about that through some of my experiences that I've been through, but this is just simply a brief testimony regarding the subject of race. I joined the church back in the mid-70s. The people were prejudiced. It was a white church, apostolic. The black church that I had visited was a cult. So I ended up finding this white church. They were really nice people, but quite a few of them was prejudiced. They weren't racist. They were prejudiced. The pastor was prejudiced. The son wasn't. You know, this apostolic church where the women didn't cut their hair. They let the hair down. Her hair goes down to their ankles. I stayed with them a year before I went to another church. This church was simply a pass-through. I was just studying their doctrines before I ended up at another all-white charismatic church. But this apostolic church was all white. I was the only black person there. Later on, after I left, one of the young ladies who was a part of that church walked up to me and said, Enoch, because her husband played the piano in our wedding, my wife and my wedding. She said, Enoch, as long as you were there, that you was the only black person there, they didn't mind. She said, but a black family tried to join the church. This was in the mid-70s now. A black family tried to join the church and they wouldn't allow it. Because that's too many black people. But remember, when I was studying race back in the early 70s, I realized that race as we know it is really not correct. The anthropologists actually divided mankind into 3 major races: Negroid, Cuscasoid, and Mongoloid, with a 4th called the Australoid race. When in reality, that concept is really not accurate, simply because the racial variations overlap too much. It really does. It really does, people. I can't even begin to tell you about the racial distinction in mankind. Now I'm going to finish this by reading this study that I copied from a book called The Proper Study of Mankind. Quote, white people are the hairiest, perhaps because most of them live in the colder climates. Negroes have the darkest skin color, certainly because this gives some primitive and other less primitive characteristics. The thin lips of the white man, for instance, are nearest those of the ape. The thick lips of the Negro further away. Skin color is determined by two chemicals, carotene, which gives a yellow tinge, and melanin, which gives a brown. These colors combined with the pinkish tinge from blood vessels showing through provide all the skin shades known. Every human being has some of each. All races can interbreed everywhere and with remarkable industry have done so. Your typical European is a dizzy mixture of Slav, Mongol, African, Celt, Saxon, Teutron, Semite, and other strains. All races except the Australian Aborigines have developed high civilizations from time to time. There were Negro empires and states in Africa when large sections of Europe were sunk in barbarism. The people of China were reading, I don't know if it's Lao or Tao, when the original Britons were painting their bodies blue and yellow in the fins. I guess that's F-I-N-S. The Maya Indians were better astronomers and sculptors than their Spanish conquerors. Unquote. People, there's a lot to say about the racial situation. This is simply a brief testimony regarding race and religion. God bless.